Ghost Modern, Chapter 7. Sarah sits numbly on the bed. The silence collapses around her. The deafening quiet after a cacophony of noise abruptly ends. Wind blows through the open window, the space which John had disappeared through. The John she knew had disappeared long ago. But how had the creature he'd become left this room? Was he taken somehow by the flood of birds that had poured through the house? Or had he left under his own power? To go where? She sits in shock for many minutes until flickering light breaks into the edges of her eyes. The pattern of alternating light was like rapid eye movement. It slips into Sarah's dreamlike state. She feels ephemeral, as if she might also disappear through the window. Unconsciously, the dissolution of her body seems something desirable, to leave the confusion and the pain. She is suddenly aware that the restless light is outside of her. John's computer monitor is a fierce barrage of light. She remembers the lights in the sky before the police came into her garden. Something makes her think of Morse code or the equivalent with lights, like ships use to signal over distance through fog. She gets up. The screen seems otherworldly, when she has stood and watched Roman legionnaires only a few hours before. She reaches out and hits the spacebar. The screen goes black for a moment. She feels like she will fall in, another slice of void cut into her reality. Then images start to form, photos. Like a Victorian freak show, she saw multiple creatures, seemingly spliced together. Animals that looked like they had been pieced together from random parts. She would have thought these were crude, Frankenstein-like stitching together of body parts of dead animals, perhaps one of those hoax internet jokes pretending to be an alien. But when she looks closer, there are no stitches. The animals look to have been born this way. Some only just born, apparently already dead. But then there is a video. A four-legged creature tries with difficulty to walk. The body and head are far too big for the spindly legs. The body is round, chubby, with the rubbery face. It resembles a pig, but the legs look brittle, maybe a lamb's. The creature collapses to the floor and the video ends. Sarah felt sick. This is what John's equations and scientific language produced. This was how abstract, impenetrable symbols became real. She thought about the place John worked. When he wasn't at home, he had an office or lab, she didn't really know, in the science park, which existed on the fringes of the military base. John had been very brusque and evasive when she mentioned the base. She had been intrigued. When she searched on the internet to get information about where they would be living, to read the stories of how the base was used during the Second World War, the extensive network of tunnels, and most intriguing of all, although she laughed at it, the crazy theories about there being aliens under there. Under here. She looked down at her feet. Even though she was on the upper floor, below the floorboards, beneath the ground floor, the tunnels, were these experiments happening now in the earth beneath her? She starts to pull out the drawers in the desk, folders, sheets of paper with biro squiggles, the indecipherable symbols, runes of the technological age. She's looking for something that she saw John take from his desk when he went to the office. Here, a laminated pass with a barcode, more symbols, a code to pass through a gate, to find out what was inside. She didn't think through whether it would actually be possible to get in. She had been living through impossible for weeks now. Anything could happen. She was about to leave when she sees an old Polaroid photo in the drawer. She didn't recall John ever having or showing her any old photos like that. She takes it out. The photo still has that gloss on it. She remembers the feel of them when she was a child. The glossy, instant capture of a moment that came instantly from the camera, taking moments to form as the paper was waved in the air. Her mother had one. And as she looks at the photo in her hand, it's as if her mind is producing the image as her eyes focus on a young girl in a pretty white dress. She's always loved that dress. The girl, she's sure, is her. She doesn't recall it being taken. There's a man in a uniform standing beside her. He has that official military blank expression, not quite standing to attention, but feigning being informal, relaxed, when he clearly felt uncomfortable. He had a hand on Sarah's shoulder. She was smiling. She didn't seem scared, like she knew the man. But Sarah has no recollection of anyone in the army being around her or her family. On the other side of her girl self is a woman, perhaps in her 30s. With a start, Sarah feels she could be looking at a recent photo of herself. Almost, but not quite. Was it her mother? It doesn't look an exact image of the woman she had looked at for hours over the years in the only photos she had of her mother. She had the precious box of photos and letters which she analysed in great detail over the years. The photos were mainly her and her grandmother, many in that same favourite pretty dress. Her nan had been the one who looked after her, brought her up. The woman in this photo looks different from the familiar image, maybe not completely, different colour hair. That could change, of course. Build? Perhaps she just put on weight. The woman looked a bit shorter, but maybe that was because she was standing near the soldier. Sarah had only sketchy memories of her mother, which was why she clung to the family photos and the letters, some of which were from her mother to her grandmother. Her nan told Sarah that her mother had a very busy job to do, very important, something to do with the government. And then she died, suddenly. In the background of this unseen photo, there is a house. It was a strange, elongated building, like it was stretched from the bottom upwards, leaning slightly to the side. It sticks up like a brick thumb with a sloping tile roof, but the bottom and top halves seem somehow to be pulling against each other, going in different directions. The bottom half has dark lattice windows and an imposing front door with wooden beams holding it on both sides. The walls are also crisscrossed by wooden beams, an archetypal English country cottage. But the second story has pointy stone window arches, pointing audaciously at the sky. The Gothic seems to have been forced down on top of the cottage, smashing the thatched roof inside. The place doesn't resonate in her memory, but she feels a strange sensation within her. There is a connection which she can feel in her body when she looks at the uneven, surreal architecture. There is something within the walls that is part of her, even though her mind can't access it. She is hot and then cold. Sweat glistens on her skin like the gloss on the photo. The camera image freezes the moment it haunts her now. Why did John have this photo of her as a child? He'd always kept away from her box of memories. He knew she was protected of it. It was all she had left, but she had never seen this photograph. She took the photo and John's work pass, both shiny, reflecting light that sometimes made the surface unseeable. She left this house that she thought was hers to try and find her husband and her past. She knew the approximate location of John's work, opposite the secured gates of the military base. It wasn't far from the house, as the crow flies, but it was long for the woman to walk. Of course it started to rain. Black clouds made the morning night. Sarah realises she is wearing flimsy clothing, ripped from her journey back and forward through the forest, blood staining the material, mud caked to her from the ground in the long barrow. Now all this is being washed from her in the immersive downpour. Thick rain, like an ocean, has been picked up and dropped from a mile up above. She keeps her head down for the first part of the walk, just pointing her body in the right direction and trudging uphill alongside the main road. There are constant cars passing, ploughing up the water, collecting by the side of the road. One throws at water that hits Sarah with a force, a slap from the elements. She keeps walking. The cold and the wet are nothing at this moment. She is deep in her mind, trying to reach back and put herself inside the photo she has clasped to her. oblivious to its eroding surface in the torrent. She pictures the strange, misshapen house, looking like nothing she has ever seen. She tries to put herself within the walls, the beams of an age gone by. She turns the corner to the side road, to the base, and in front of her are the beams, topped by Gothic arches, the house. She feels like she has walked into the photo. She looks at it, but the glossy Polaroid is crumpled and disintegrates in her hand. She looks up at the new reality from her past. A gate stands at the front of the garden, no fence attached, just 2 tall wooden posts on each side, each with a tree almost growing out of the top of it. She sees the 2 symbols again that the old woman had carved outside her house, the backwards Z from the strange pointed capital B. Her body takes her round the back. She knows to go to the far back window. It was slightly broken, never quite shut, so it could be pushed open. She is climbing through, wondering why it was such a tight squeeze. Her body remembers flying through without any resistance. Now the frames of the window are tearing at her sides. Fresh blood comes from scratches on the splintered wood. She falls in, spraining the wrists she lands on. There used to be a table there. She could clamber over it and into the living room. She stands up. The room is gloomy, musty. The stormy skies outside keep it shadowy. She looks around for a light switch, then decides against it. No point in advertising her presence to anyone outside. Her crash landing on the floor was noisy. She stands quietly and listens. No noise, no movement. She starts to walk slowly through the room. It's furnished like a cross between a junk shop and an antiques fair. The sofa and chairs are from different sets, the upholstery splitting at seams and trying to burst free, like a middle-aged man who had lost control of his waist. She goes to walk out of the room, then stops with a jolt. Beside the door, there is a large framed enlarged photo. There she is, the same girl in the pretty dress, the same uniformed, straight-faced military man, the same woman with the out-of-time house behind them. "Come upstairs, Sarah, it's time for bed." She steps back in shock till she realises the words are in her head. She has stood in this position as her mother called down to her. She swallows now and walks through to the hallway and slowly up the stairs. Her steps echo in her mind. She'd crept back in when she ran away once. Why was she only remembering now? At the top of the stairs, her room is ahead of her. She had laid there for hours each night. Sleep wouldn't come. She couldn't remember why. Couldn't remember the dreadful thoughts, memories that scurried around inside her young head, keeping her far from sleep. Across from the bed is the dressing table. She used to sit at it and study herself in the mirror. She was sure that she had done that in a different house, a different place. Perhaps the dressing table had been taken to the other house, the one she recalled in her childhood, but she no longer trusted anything she believed from the past. On the table there's a box. It can't be. It was under her bed at home, where she had kept it since they moved in. She always wanted it close to her. Too much had been lost. Now she realises she only knew a fragment of what had gone before. She sees the words she wrote on top of the box, family, maybe 20 years ago. She opens it and sees a familiar jumble of paper and pictures. A door slams downstairs. "I'm back, John. Got some breakfast for you." Sarah whirls round as a large black raven flies across the landing and swoops down the stairs. Her heart crashes against her chest. She has to fight to breathe. John is here. She knew it. The old woman is responsible. She's stolen her husband, stolen her memories. Anger overtakes fear. The blood rising within her makes her step out to the top of the stairs. A board creaks loudly. Sarah freezes. The footsteps downstairs stop. An unbearable quiet. "We know you're here, Sarah. Welcome home." She turns as if to run, but the old woman will be closer to the front door than she is, and she is beyond running away now. She wants answers. John is here. She flings open the doors to the other rooms. "John!" she shouts. "John!" "You won't find him up there, Sarah. Come down and stop being childish." Sarah heard the words, and she recalled hearing those words decades earlier. She is standing there in her nightshirt. She has crept out on the landing because she couldn't sleep. She knows it's late and she should be in bed, but she can hear voices. She knows it's the man in uniform talking downstairs with her mother about her. Now she is an adult. She must face up to those controlling her. She walks steadily down the stairs. She glances in the junk shop living room, but it's empty. Now her body is taking her to the place she and her mother spent most of their time. She remembers helping her mother to cook dinner. The kitchen is large, with an oak table dominating. The old woman sits at the far end, her face firm like the wood, lined with many years that held her together and weighed her down at the same time. "Take a seat, Sarah." "No, where is my husband?" The raven drops down from a shelf above Sarah's head and perches on the end of the table beside the old woman. He pecks at the plate of nuts in front of her. Now, John, breakfast can wait." Sarah snorts with disgust. "You called your bird John? Are you trolling me? Is this some joke to you? Where is my husband?" The raven flaps his wings. Sarah had never seen such a huge bird in real life. She glanced to the window, relieved it was shut. "And how do you remember your husband, Sarah? What did he look like?" "You're taunting me now. You've no right." Tears came to Sarah's eyes. "I'm not taunting you. Describe how you last saw him." "I'm sure you know, and it was probably you who made him that way. He was crushed, shrunken, like something you'd see on the side of a church. His eyes looked trapped in his face. It was forced forward, like his bones were stretching to break out of his mouth. And his back, that's what I saw first, misshapen, bones and skin jutting out behind him, like he was growing—" "Wings?" the old woman interjected. "And his face, stretching forward, hard, like a beak." She looked Sarah in the eye, then flicked her gaze to the raven, who flapped his wings and squawked. Sarah looks aghast at the bird, and again she meets those trapped eyes. "John! Oh my God!" She feels faint and falls forward, grabbing the back of a chair to stop herself falling. "How—" You have an idea now of John's experimental work. Like so many people over the centuries, they thought they could control forces for their own purposes, but they flew too close to the sun. Sarah's eyes widened. So he actually used science to transform himself into a completely different creature. "I don't think you can take all the credit, can you, John?" The raven ruffled his feathers and shuffled backwards and forwards on the table. "John is a brilliant scientist, and he had the resources of government and military to help him, but they still couldn't do this without—" She stopped, and Sarah thought the woman was going to cry. Sarah felt words coming out of her mouth without thought. "What happened to my mother? And who is that man in the photo? The soldier?" "He wouldn't like to hear you call him that. He was an officer, very high-ranking, very important, he would say. But he was nothing without your mother, and then you." She looked at Sarah with piercing eyes. Sarah saw with a flash a memory of her screaming at the man in uniform. She found herself shouting, "Mummy!" out loud, then burst into tears. "Did he kill her?" The old woman shook her head. "If only it was that simple. Your mother has tremendous power. She embodies the wisdom and magic of the ancients. You remember seeing the fleeing of the villagers from the Roman soldiers? They were in a line that stretched back before the floods, before the Ice Age, and then stretching forward till today, an unbroken line, a line that carries the power now, within you, Sarah." "Me? I don't know any magic or ancient wisdom. I do a mundane job, filling in spreadsheets and answering customer emails." "They trap everyone in mediocrity so they forget their power. That's the modern way, equivalent of the sword, although they haven't forgotten how to use violence as well." "They killed her," whispered Sarah. "No, I said your mother has power, present tense." Sarah looked up in disbelief. "She died. I remember the funeral." She remembers black everywhere, tears and numbness somehow stopped her crying. "You went to a funeral?" Sarah has an abrupt thought. "Are you my mother?" The old woman shook her head wearily. "Again, it's not that simple. You haven't reached the end of your quest, Sarah. You have to come back to the beginning." She stands. "You forgot things to protect yourself. Your grandmother took you far away, but the government needed you back here. They need your mother to harness what she can do, the power to resonate with the earth, with the animals. But she started to refuse them. They've brought you back here. She can feel that. She knows you're in danger. John is part of this, Sarah. He chose this village, didn't he? So she's here. Sarah looks about her, as if her mother would emerge from a cupboard. She may be close, but you can't see her. She's deep under your feet, not buried, but plugged into their machines, in the tunnels they've carved into the sacred stone. Sarah had a fleeting joy at the knowledge that her mother was alive, only to realise that she had been a human battery wired up and chained for decades in an underground prison. We must get her out. Yes, Sarah, you must. The old woman stands and walks slowly out of the kitchen. Wait, where are you going? You must help me. How do you know all these things? Who are you? My time has ended, but the cycle is turning back. The woman keeps walking, opens the front door and walks out into the garden. She turns to face Sarah, who stands in the doorway and holds her arms up in the air. Instantly, the sounds of birds singing, chirping, squawking, gathers over the roof of the house and reaches a high-pitched crescendo as a thick cloud of birds flies down, eddying round the old woman like a whirlpool. They reach the ground at her feet. She has lost to sight. They spin in perpetual motion, a vortex. They start to rise as one mass. The revolving cloud passes the tops of the trees and continues to the dark clouds, which part, revealing the sun's new light. The rays hit the garden, which is now empty. Sarah! She turns and sees the twisted body of John, human again, but bloody, in the doorway of the kitchen. He collapses to the floor. She rushes to him. I'm here, John. But John wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the empty space where the old woman had been. Sarah's face was contorted with confusion. It was tired, older somehow. She felt something on her shoulder. A bird. Another one. Then suddenly the entire garden was black with what she presumed were the old woman's birds. John read her thoughts. They're your birds, Sarah. They always were. It's time. Time for what? Sarah was frantically trying to make sense of the last hour. Time to become her. As John said this, the squawking and chirping of 1,000 tiny beaks began to take form. She could read the language in her head, the sharp pointy B, the strange backward Z, the language of the birds. What was her name, John? John had already begun the painful transition back to Raven. His pointed, misshapen mouth moved. She heard an incomprehensible sound, but in her head the symbols of the new language spelt out. S-A-R-A-H. The end.